And there it goes live. All right. So my name is Lowell Francis, and I blog at Age of Ravens, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of the Play on Target podcast. And for the last couple of years, I've done histories of different RPG genres, working through horror, steampunks, post-apocalypse, and my favorite, supers. And one of the things I did just a couple weeks ago was to look at all of the superhero games that came out in 2014. And one of the standout games that came out that year is Ampere 1 by Eloy Lasanta. And he's designer of Camp Myth and Mermaid Adventures. We've got Part-Time Gods. We've got one of my favorites, Wu Zing, Apocalypse Prevention Incorporated. All kinds of stuff there. It's a really amazing and diverse lineup of games that he's developed. So I'd like to say, did I miss anything there in my run through of your games?
Infestation.
Infestation, that's right. Because you talked about that with Rich Rogers, a panel that I watched, which is, very different games. One of the other games you worked on is Kid World, right?
Yes. Kid World was actually my very first game I ever wrote on.
That's an amazing game. That's one of the most striking post-apocalyptic games I've ever read. Just as a read, it is kind of devastating. And the mechanics you have in there to simulate that genre are really spooky.
Oh yeah,
really good.
I'm nodding right now. The audience can't hear it or anything, but I'm nodding. So.
It's and that cover. Oh man, that's one of the most effective grabber covers I think of anything I've ever seen.
Yeah, so. I think Brian did a very good job. He was the main publisher, and he did all the art direction and whatnot on Kid World specifically. I was a co-author. I was very green, and it was my very first thing that I had ever worked on before. So it was a really, really fun time, and I actually learned quite a bit from Brian. I carried a lot of what I learned from Kid World into my own publishing.
Well, and again, I think I can't stress this enough, how diverse the genres and material that you've done across the line, from children's games or kid-oriented games to more serious games, to very different kinds of approaches, which is really interesting, because I followed a number of designers where they kind of reiterate their own work, and you're certainly not doing that.
Yeah, for me though, that was a very purposeful thing. Like, I came into it from a direction saying I'm going to try and tackle as many different subject matter as possible. So I started off with agents trying to fight the apocalypse, pretty standard stuff. And then I did ninjas, and then I did gods, and then I did mermaids, and then I did camp, and then I did supers, and and each time trying to I actively tried to make each one as differently from the one before it, because kind of the goal here, I know a lot of companies and a lot of writers, they do like to do the thing where they come up with a lot of kind of ideas that are all very samey, so that if you come to buy their things, if you like this one, then you'll like that one, then you'll like this one, and they can upsell you. Whereas I'm kind of different. I kind of just have a lot of different things under the same banner. So even if you don't like that thing, you will like this thing. So it's kind of the just a different approach. I think I end up with probably the same results. I'm pretty happy with it as well. It also allows me to really kind of, my reputation isn't just that I write horror, or just that I write sci-fi, which I've seen a lot of authors end up doing. Like, I get jobs and I write for a lot of different types of games, and nobody flinches at the idea that I maybe won't be able to write in one genre or another, because I've already shown that I'm pretty flexible in that regard.
Wow. And I want to start then with Ampere 1, which I should also say, there's Ampere 2. We'll come back to that. That Kickstarter finished a few months ago very successfully, right?
Yep.
And we'll talk about how that works together. But I want to have you, for people who may not be aware of what the game's premise is and what the details are, if you could give us that.
Oh, sure. So what Ampere 1 was my attempt to kind of put the first year of what happens when people get superpowers under a microscope. Because what you end up having with a lot of other supers games is they say, supers have been around for a while, this, that. All right, everybody make up characters and run around. So what I really wanted to do was kind of I wanted to really just kind of dissect that first year and say, what types of things would happen if it happened tomorrow? And actually, this specifically Ampere 1, it came out in 2014, but it actually takes place in 2015. I think at this point, like, we've had a lot of really devastating things happen in the game. But the idea was really just to kind of approach it from, kind of a different angle than a lot of other supers games kind of approach the subject matter and make people think more about who the character is as a person, and not just what kind of collection of powers can I group together. It's like, no, but who were you as a person before you got powers? And Ampere 1 was very much a year about discovery. So kind of the theme of it all was like, what happens when this regular person discovers that they have powers, and what kind of choices are they faced with, and what kind of things do they do with those, knowing that if they were to come out public, then it's really, really dangerous for them to do so, because other people who have also started having powers have started disappearing. So it's like, well, you don't want to just come straight out, because then it's bad stuff could happen, so, and it really does. It starts off very, very like subtle, and then eventually erupts at the end of year 1, which was kind of the idea there. I mean, there's like a good, I would say, about 6 months before, anything really big happens, and then the end of the year obviously is pretty big as well.
What do you think for a GM coming into this, coming from, say, a traditional superheroes game with, either just generic system or with a kind of very much a 4-color setting? What do you see as the challenges or transitions for them?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that we definitely weren't trying to recreate the 4-color genre. It was definitely not Golden Age. It's definitely more, I've heard it a bunch of different ways. Modern Age, Iron Age, I've heard. But it's basically, it's kind of darkish. It's kind of like where comics have gone nowadays, and shows like Heroes, where you have the majority of people have like a power, and yeah, some people might have a secondary power, but most people have like one power that they're really good at, and they have to milk that one power for as much as they can do. But I would say, so that's in terms of setting, I would just say be prepared for darker storylines. The system is pretty brutal. Like people sometimes get one-shotted and stuff like that, and you're like, but I'm a superhero, and it's just like, well, you weren't super enough to not get shot by that gun. So I mean, there's that. From a mechanics standpoint, I would say it's fairly different in terms of not having a toolkit, but it's also versatile in its implementation. So I would say that it would take a little bit for someone who's used to more traditional supers RPGs to get used to, but I don't think that it's too far outlying to kind of catch the groove of what's in the book.
Well, let me talk about then ask you, again, superheroes. I've talked to some people, and they find it the real challenging genre to do, because you have to cover so much, and powers become, and the way powers are handled and bought, become a real definition for how the supers game works. And you take a very interesting tack with the kind of breaking up into the power lines. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And anybody else that you've talked to, I would say, is definitely correct in what they said. I don't think that I have ever been asked how much can an amp lift before. Like, I have been asked that so many times, but never for any of my other games. Nobody asked me how much a ninja can lift. Nobody asked me, how much a mermaid can lift. But as soon as you start talking superpowers, they're just like, but how much can like the strongest amp lift though? And I'm like, I don't know, do the math.
I have to step. Actually, my friend Gene Ha, who draws comics,
Mhm.
and I love him dearly, and he's a good gamer, but he can't get past that. In any supers game, he goes, well, the strength thing doesn't seem to work. It seems like it must. The math doesn't work, and I'm like, it does. Just go with it. Just go. So yeah.
Exactly. So the way that we approach kind of powers in Ampere 1 is we kind of group them up into what we call strains, which are kind of like character classes if you kind of wanted to group them together like that. So what the strains are is they are collections of powers that are like in their concept, that a character is more likely to develop because they have. If you have one power in a strain, you're more likely to develop powers within that same strain because they're linked conceptually. For instance, one of them is bulks. So that's super strength, super speed, super evasion, biomorph, which is messing with your own physiology, invulnerability, and there's another one that I can't think of. Oh, regeneration. So those 6 are all grouped under the bulk strain. And so if you have super strength, which we call behemoth, if you have behemoth, then you are more likely to develop any of those other 5 powers in addition to behemoth than you are powers from another strain. And that's kind of how we work with some of the XP and whatnot, because so that you're not having characters who are completely wildly different in their power applications. Although you can still have that, it's harder to do. So that's probably one of the things. And there's 9 different strains, which means for anybody who's doing the math out there, that's 54 powers in the book, in the core book. And then we've come out with a ton of powers since then. But 54 that are in the core book. So what ends up happening is when you purchase a power and you buy that first level of a power, you end up getting the core ability of that power. And that gives you an array of different things that you can do. And then for every even level that you get in that power, you also gain what is called an augment, which either enhances that core ability or gives you a new thing to do with that power. And this was a way for us to avoid having to do a lot of because I was trying to avoid the toolkit approach to this all. So it's not just I'm going to buy this thing and then it does, and then I'm just going to color it. Instead, you're buying into the concept already. So we create enhancements and tricks, which are what the augments are called. So if we were to take, for instance, the air power, which is actually one of my favorite powers to use in my examples that I use. So the core ability of air is that you can, I believe that your ranged abilities get a bonus equal to air. You can also affect air currents and pressure and whatnot, and fragrance, and you kind of just affect the air in your general area. And then with augments and tricks, you can do things like call in a storm, or charge your fist with electricity, fly on the wind, things like that. So that's not you buying the flight power separately. It's all part of the air power. Because you can do all of these things, they're all thematically together, which was how we were able to get 54 wildly different powers, which is fun. It's one of those things, like the way that you said it before was the way that you purchase powers and the way that powers are implemented and used colors a lot of how the game will go. And the fact that we have so many different powers and they all kind of all have sometimes their own kind of mechanics behind each individual power, and the way that they work actually allows each power to kind of stand independently from each other, as opposed to it just being this kind of blanket, yeah, you can do that sort of thing, so let's just move on. Yeah. All right. I'm done rambling now.
It's great. I mean, I think you found a great middle ground between sort of fully fictionally defined powers, something like Worlds in Peril uses, or something purely effects defined, like the more recent Mutants to Masterminds or Champions, which are down to the very base bricks. There's a nice generation there, and built into the world. I think one of the things that I appreciate about reading through it is how much the powers reflect the tone of the world. The world reflects that. I think I've only seen that a few other times. Mutant City Blues kind of integrates setting and powers together really well, and yours does as well.
Brave New World is probably another example of that. How they were able to kind of mix the two and really kind of, which was interesting because I didn't end up reading Brave New World until after I had already made AMP. And somebody was like, hey, you know, that kind of reminds me of Brave New World. I'm like, really? Let me check into that. And I was like, oh, yeah, it kind of does. You know, obviously, you know, different, but similar at least. So there was that. But yes, you know, I myself, I like light games, but I'm very much for medium crunch. I'm very medium with all of my approach. I don't like it to be too easy, but I don't want to have to do calculus.
Right.
You know, so I want there to be some strategy involved, because when it becomes all just the storytelling, you know, of the game, then it's no longer a game. It's like a story. It's a story game at that point, not a role-playing game. Which is weird. I know there's a bunch of different definitions and stuff going around for all of these things. But I think that Supers games thrive when there are numbers and people can, because it's a very kind of deep thing with us comic fans, where we're so used to seeing like trading cards and comics where there's the bar graphs and it's just like, well, you know, the Hulk's bar graph for strength is all the way up, but Superman's is all the way up too. So, but if they're all both way up, then who's gonna win? And it's like we like the math behind comics, and it's just it's a matter of making that math approachable, versus something that's going to, you know, take like 8 hours to make a character. Which I have seen before. So,
well, that's a good jumping. What has been your play experience, your GMing experience, your reading experience with Supers over the years?
Well, I mean, I started with Heroes Unlimited was where I actually started.
Oh,
I played
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I played a lot of Palladium games when I was younger.
Okay.
They hold a special place in my heart. And you know, since becoming a publisher, it's a kind of interesting because I've met a lot of the artists and writers who work on Palladium Books. They've even written on some of my things. So it's actually really cool to kind of, it's almost like I'm producing my own stuff, but using the Palladium staff. So it's almost like, you know, fulfilling one of those childhood dreams, but not really. But
and they have there are some marvelous source books like Century Station stuff for Heroes Unlimited, which are really awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's kind of always the thing that you would always get out of Palladium, is that obviously their system is outdated, which obviously it looks like they're making you know, approaches to fix that with, you know, bringing in Savage Worlds and stuff like that. I mean, they're definitely taking the right steps, I think. But their worlds and their settings were always very interesting. So I mean, that's what kept me around for so long when I was, you know, playing it. But anyway, so I played a bunch of Heroes Unlimited. I've played since then. I had actually played some Icons, and I had played some Mutants and Masterminds. And then when I actually started the process of deciding that I was going to make my own Supers game, I kind of just went out and just grabbed as many as I could find. And I just tried to play all of the different games, all of those different Supers RPGs that I could get my hands on. So I played, you know, Hearts and Souls, and I played, what was it? The Paragons and Prowlers, I think it's called.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I didn't play like extensively. I didn't play like session after session of these games. But it was a big deal for me to definitely go out and try and experience all the different ones, so I can make sure that I wasn't just, you know, rebuilding the wheel. Like I didn't want to just go out there and do something that somebody else had already done. I was really trying to do something new with the design of Ampere 1.
Anything of those games that maybe didn't go into AMP, but you appreciate a particular design element of any of those?
Well, honestly, I think Champions is actually really good, and it plays very well. One of the things that I found when I was playing Champions was that it was definitely laborious to make a character. But as soon as you had that character made, gameplay was great. Never had any problems. After you had the numbers down, it was super easy to just pick up and play. And I've since decided I would never make any more characters in that system. But anytime somebody wants to run a game like with pregens or whatever, I'm very happy to play. It's a very good game. So streamlining kind of character creation was definitely a big thing that I wanted to make sure was definitely there for AMP. But I really kind of wanted that kind of, all you had to do was look at your sheet and then make a roll. And it wasn't a big rigmarole about like, well, what am I rolling? Well, I don't know what I'm rolling. It's like, it's in AMP, it's actually very what's the word? It's
Intuitive?
Intuitive. That's exactly the word I was looking for. It's very intuitive. Like what are you going to roll is you just kind of pick it up and you're just like, oh, well, I would roll this and this. Yes, that's exactly what you would roll. Plus some of the rules actually tell you what to roll. But even when we get to like the skill combos, a lot of the stuff, usually it only takes a couple of rolls before players start picking up on how that would work. I remember I was at a con and I was like, I was like, what do you want to do? And the guy was like, I want to hide from the bees. I was running one of the published adventures. And he's like, I want to hide from the bees. And I was like, what do you think you should roll for that? And he's like, beast handling and stealth. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what you should roll. So he's like, yes, let's do that then. And he picked it up super fast. I've seen that happens a lot of the time with AMP, is that people pick up the system very quickly. And that was definitely something that I wanted. When I played a bunch of icons, I really liked how easy it was to make a character. I liked the gameplay, but it was a little too simplistic. So then it was a matter of, I wanted that same fun element, but I needed it to be slightly crunchier. So I don't know. It's like there's definitely something to grab from almost any game. There's something to kind of draw from. But yeah. That's my answer.
And I do want to stress for anyone looking at the game, one of the real strengths of what you've presented there is that you do have that flexibility about choice for what gets called for actions and skills. And I think that's one of the ways that get people go, oh, it's too crunchy, or look, and how do I do this? The play is very open, and that's a great move. I think that's really smart, and especially with a superhero game. People who might be worried about, okay, there are a lot of different rules here, a lot of different elements. Once they realize that they can combine all that, that's awesome.
Well, exactly, and especially in superheroes games, because I know from any time I've ever played one, somebody will come up with some new way to use an ability that is completely off the books. Now, and if you're running it in a more traditional game, where the GM rules everything and everything is very, very static, then the GM can either say, well, yeah, let's go ahead and run it that way, or, which happens more likely than not, they go, well, that's not the way it's written, so no. But if you just leave that openness in the game system from the get-go, then even the GM, because again, not everybody has an awesome GM. Some people have butt heads for GMs. But if you leave it open, the GM can't even use the rule book as a way to say no to you. So it's like, it's like, well, no, the book says say yes, actually. The book says discuss, so that's kind of part of it. So yeah, I mean, that's how I like to write my games, especially that game, because with Supers games, you end up with a lot more ingenuity from the players, because they're like, well, I have ice powers, so could I use ice to break the lock? Well, yeah, you could. It's like, well, you technically only have the power to blast it, but if you switch it around just a little bit here, then you can freeze it off, and it's awesome. It's just like, yeah, it's like, why not let them do that?
Let me ask about another sort of granddaddy of superhero games, one that I think I played once, but when I've talked to superhero gamers, a lot of people cite this as the one that opened their eyes. Have you ever played the old TSR Marvel superhero game?
The Phase Rip?
Yes.
I played Phase Rip once, like a long time ago. And then from what I remember, there was a lot of chart rolling, and that's not really for me. So I didn't like revisit it when I started designing AMP, because from what I remember, it was definitely not what I was interested in going forward with.
Okay.
But yes, I did play it. I played it once. It was one session that I played with Frenzy like over a decade ago. And it was fun. I mean, it was Marvel. I like Marvel. I actually really like the new Marvel a lot. The one that Margaret Weiss did.
Oh yeah.
The Marvel Heroic role playing. I actually really liked that one. And of course, and then the Cam Banks designed that one. Cam Banks is right now working on the Sentinels RPG, which I'm also very excited for, because Sentinels of the Multiverse is one of my favorite card games. So, you know, it's fun stuff.
Yeah, I was. That's certainly one that has my attention, and because it's a cool setting that I would love to see more done in other media.
Yeah, totally.
Well, you mentioned Marvel, and you mentioned your love of comics. So let me come to that. What's your sort of grounding? What's your faves? What would you say the influences for you?
Well, oh my gosh. So I mean, I even put this in the book, but like XMen, basically. XMen was kind of my go-to. Like overall, I liked XMen. I liked like the base XMen, and I was a big fan of Excalibur myself. I liked the kind of taking the X-Men and kind of putting them into some sort of like fantastical setting, which is why I kind of liked Excalibur. There was a little bit more magic involved. But pretty much any X-Men title is like a way, if you really wanted to play an X-Men game, then Ampere 1 is kind of for you. A lot of people describe Ampere 1 as like street level, but I wouldn't even say that. It's more it's definitely like it doesn't go up to cosmic, because that's not what the game is designed to do. But you can still do a lot of really, really amazing things with the way the mechanics are written. But Daredevil was also a big favorite of mine from way back in the day. I was actually really happy when his TV show came out, because it was like, yay, I get to, yay, because that was my guy. Like everybody else was like into Spider-Man and stuff, and I'd be like, but Daredevil rules, and I'd be like, hey, he's just some blind guy, and I was just like, but no, but he's awesome. But Daredevil was always a big fave of mine. So like Excalibur and Daredevil were the main ones that I ended up buying like a lot of when I was younger. I mean, and obviously Spider-Man, Superman. I always like some Superman as well.
But I'm hearing Marvel fanboy though, those more strongly.
I was
right?
always more of a Marvel. Yeah. Well, you know, the thing about Marvel versus DC, and not to really get into that, hopefully we don't get like a bunch of haters coming on and, you know, stuff like that. But the thing about Marvel and DC is very much about lineage. And, you know, and like the passing down of titles. And DC is also very much about symbols and like these grandiose characters. Which I never really identified with. That's probably why one of my only really DC titles that I ever really read was Teen Titans, because it wasn't about those big iconic characters. It was about the people under them, and they were very real people. And that's kind of where Marvel kind of gets it right, is that every one of those characters is a person. Like, you know, Scott is not, you know, I say Scott like everybody knows Scott Summers. So Cyclops is, you know, like everybody's got flaws. Like Cyclops is, you know, the guy who, you know, shoots beams out of his eyes, but that's not all there is to his character. Like he's a leader, but he's also a failed leader, and he's got jealousy issues, and like you can read an X-Men comic and you know who Scott is. Whereas if you read a Superman comic, like he, you know, pretends to be Clark Kent for a little bit and then goes and punches a hole in the moon. You know, it's just like, okay, but who is he though? Like what part of Superman, as much as I love Superman, what part of him is real? Because it's either he's by himself and he's doing all these amazing things, or he's pretending to be human and it's kind of a farce. So it's kind of interesting the way that DC and Marvel they're very different in their approach to comics. But yeah, I've always been more of a Marvel fanboy though. So I would say you'll definitely feel more Marvel from Ampere 1 than you would DC.
Well, let me go out a little bit even further into the grass here,
Sure.
to an X-Men question that
Okay.
I've talked to several people. I I kind of skipped out on comics during the 90s and only came back in the 2000s. But talking to a lot of people for whom the X-Men cartoon and things like that was important to them,
Yeah.
there's one particular run on the X-Men that is very controversial, really divisive for them. So did you read Grant Morrison's run on X-Men?
Which one was that?
So it's the one where Professor X's sort of sister, fetal sister, is in his mind, and she takes over. And it's the part where Scott starts to build a relationship with Emma Frost, and Magneto is Zorn during that period.
No, I had kind of dialed out right before that, apparently, because I remember that I loved the comics, and then I came back, and all of a sudden Scott was with Emma, and I was just like, so I was not part of that. I actually didn't read any of that stuff. Although they kind of revisited some of that in some of the cartoons, and it kind of made it make sense. Like, at least in the way that it was in the cartoons, I believe it was Wolverine and the X-Men.
Yeah.
Was where they revisited that kind of thing, and I was just like, okay, yeah, it kind of makes sense. And I could see how that would have been an interesting storyline in the comics as well. But no, I think, because I had read for like up until probably some of like maybe early to mid 90s, and then I kind of checked out for a little bit and then came back later on. So
it was very easy to check out in the 90s with the explosion of titles there.
Yes, it really was. And, and they were coming up with a lot of like new characters that I kind of wasn't interested in. Although there were some awesome characters as well. Like, for instance, like I said, I had read a lot of Excalibur, and I actually remember when they came up with the character Silhouette, who was really cool because she could blend in the shadows and stuff. But she was kind of one of the first kind of disabled superheroes. Like Oracle, obviously, on the DC side, but I couldn't, except for Professor X, who can't walk, because he's paraplegic, but I couldn't think of another handicapped character who was a superhero. And here, Silhouette is, I believe she had scoliosis, so she had, like arm braces that she would walk around on all the time, but she could slip into shadows and stuff. So she was actually very like cool that way. Plus she was a person of color. So it was like that character was just, she was trying to hit so many different demographics. And then then Excalibur, as well as her, kind of faded away after that. So it was kind of sad.
One of the things that I think is really strong, and I'm going to follow on what you just said, is you've done a really good job throughout AMP we have a lot of different representations in the artwork. Persons of color, male, female. We've got men. Actually, one thing I noticed that in the opening, where you have the people around the table, we have one of them, they're playing a woman, and there are lots of details like that. Was that? I guess what I want to say is as a designer, how did you go about getting that from your artists?
I'm pretty good because I'm lucky to work with such good artists, and I tell my artist all the time, a lot of days now, especially with the way that RPGs is under such a microscope right now, because a lot of people who are into RPGs are also into making the world a better place and whatnot. So it's a good thing. But I think for me, I wanted to definitely have the setting be a reflection of what real life is like. So it's so crazy in comics nowadays. Like, even if you go watch the Avengers, like it's kind of interesting to see all of the Avengers are white, and one of them is a woman. So it's like, I actually really loved it when the new Avengers came out, and I was like, and Sam Wilson is Captain America, and Kamala Khan is a member now, and it's just like Thor's a woman now, and it's just like all of these different changes, but it makes for a much more interesting cast of characters. But in my case, though, for Ampere 1, sorry to keep veering off there, I wanted it to really kind of reflect more of what the real world is like. So, there's a lot more women involved. There's a lot of more people of color involved. There's not even just people of color who are, one thing. Like there's even a few mixed race people, in the mix. Like one of my favorite characters is the Lance, and the Lance is, he's a paramedic and all of that stuff. He's of Hispanic descent. His name's Diego. So it's like, it's pretty cool that like one of the cooler characters in the book, I mean, in my opinion, everybody has their favorites, is actually of Hispanic descent. And hopefully that makes it so that some people will be able to identify, with him. But I really tried to make it so that, a person's race or gender didn't have anything to do with them. I mean, that was kind of the thing. In terms of art, it's interesting though, in terms of art, because in terms of art, a lot of it was really just, hey, I want this character to be, black and make them cool looking, or I want this character to, like that sort of thing. I think there was only one thing that I ever had an issue with the art, and it was when I had one of the characters in the core book. Her name was Nymph, and she's kind of like my poison ivy equivalent. And so she's got pheromone powers, and she's also got plant powers. And I remember that I had a picture of her, and she kind of had like a bare midriff. And I remember that I had some people going, hey, why are you hypersexualizing her and everything? And it was weird to me because I live in Florida.
Oh.
Like, I see people's midriff all the time because that's just how like it's December 14th when we're recording this, and it's hot outside.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you could go to the beach today, so it's like, for me, it's like I see that everywhere I go, so it didn't bother me. I ended up, asking the artist to kind of cover it up, a little bit more than it was. But I mean, there was definitely no attempt to hypersexualize anybody. There was no, weird, outlandish physiology involved with any of the, none of that. What's the like the turn that women do in comics where you can see their butt and their breasts at the same time? Yeah, none of that. No.
The Escher physiology there.
Yes, exactly. There's even a few women in the book that, they're, some of them have ample bosoms and whatnot, but some of them, we tried to have a range. We even had some people who kind of have body types like real people in there. So I think it was a big deal to have different body types, have different, ethnicities and races and all of the different stuff, having it all in there. I think it was pretty awesome to have. We even had a Native American character in there that, I wanted to make it so that he wasn't, kimosabi and has a loincloth. Those people don't exist anymore. Like they're like nobody is like that in America anymore. Like that just doesn't exist. So, I actually did some research and I watched some documentaries on like how modern reservations are to actually kind of, go into that character's mindset to figure out where he would come from. So it's an interesting thing. It definitely represents a lot of different types of people, which was definitely a good thing. And all of that wasn't even me. Like, there's, I think there's 33 characters in the book that you can just pick up and play with. And I think 25 of them were mine. And then the other 8 were other characters, or other people's. And some of them came up with some really good concepts that were even different than what I had come up with. So it was pretty fun. That's kind of why I like the whole Kickstarter format, is because you can invite people to come and kind of play in your environment.
Well, let me say that you've had what, 8, 9 successful Kickstarters?
I just finished 13 actually.
Oh my gosh.
I just finished 13 in November was when the last one ended. It was for Ninja Crusade 2nd edition.
Mm-hmm. By the way, Ninja Crusade, it's such a fun read. That setting is so wild when you go through it.
It's even more fun now because now it's 2nd edition and I've cleaned up a lot of stuff and everything's a lot clearer. I can't wait to actually get it out into people's hands. It's still in the works right now, obviously, but I'm really excited about Ninja Crusade.
Well, and so what has been the impact of Kickstarter on your design process, on your publication process? How has that impacted you?
I would say, I mean, the design process is a big deal because, especially with AMP, because AMP was the first time that I kind of invited people in to do more. I think with Part-Time Gods previously, I had said, well, you can kind of make up your own god and we'll feature them in like the back of the book. And, you know, we had some people do that and that was fun. But with AMP, I was like, well, we will feature your name in the book. So you can actually have, like, one of the major characters can have your name. It's so interesting when, because Jacob Siegel, who is Dr. Luminous in the book, he backs every Kickstarter now. Stacy Winters is who is Critter in the book is goes onto the forums and is always posting there. You know, and it's so funny to have people who are like walking around asking questions and, you know, in the forums, and then they go, wait, your name's Stacy Winters? Wait a minute. You know, so it's, you know, and like to somebody who hasn't read the book, obviously, then they're just like, who cares who Stacy Winters is? But it's cool to read the book and then see that, you know, meet the person who actually contributed to that. So, I mean, that's just on one level. But the second level is that, you know, then I would give the rules to the players and have them come up with characters. And those characters then enter the world, and I start integrating those concepts into the world. Shell, if anybody has read Ampere 1 and Ampere 2, obviously, but Shell is actually a character that was made up by a backer. And I just really dug the concept, so I started making Shell more of a part of the storyline. And to the point where, like, we're working on year 3 right now, and Shell actually has a really big part of year 3. So, and it's kind of interesting that, you know, it really all just came from this person who was just like, I have this really cool idea to share with you. So yeah, I think that it's really cool from a design standpoint to really kind of have more minds than just mine kind of involved with the development of not only the game itself, but also kind of the storylines that can come from such a cool setting as what we have. So yeah, production-wise, it's, you know, obviously it's money up front, which is always good, which means everybody gets paid, and you know, and it's kind of a guarantee that we can make sure that the book gets out, and that's a big deal for publishers because that's not always a guarantee.
Right. And do you feel now you're a dozen Kickstarters in? Do you feel pretty confident about the fulfillment process and all of that?
Oh yeah, I'm really good at fulfilling now, because I mean, a lot of it just happens kind of in my house at this point. But I've also kind of streamlined some of the processes now, where I can basically just send a spreadsheet of addresses and names, and the printers will actually just ship out all the books, unless I need to include extras and whatnot with it, and then the rest of that gets shipped out from my house so that people can get like their character, because I do a lot of laminated pre-gens that I like to send out to people, which sounds a lot more fun than it is. It's because usually what it involves is I have a giant box of laminated sheets, and then I just spend a bunch of time printing out the characters, and then I spend hours laminating these sheets, because I think it takes about 30 seconds per sheet, you know, to do it. So it takes a long time to do it, especially if like each person who backs is going to get about, you know, 20 sheets.
Oh my.
So 30 seconds per sheet, and that's 10 minutes per backer that's getting anything.
Wow.
You know, so it does take some time, especially when you have, you know, upwards of like 40 or 50 people who are getting these pre-generated packs. So it takes some time. But you know, I've spent weekends doing it before. It's cool though. I enjoy it because, you know, if people are into it, then I'll provide them the tools.
Well, let me then pull back. You talked about the movement to Ampere 2.
Yeah.
So what happens with Ampere 2? And then I want to ask you some questions about meta story and meta plot.
Sure. So avoiding the meta plot for right now.
Okay.
What Ampere 2 does is it adds a lot more player options, basically. The biggest thing that Ampere 2 introduced was the ability to play saps, which we call regular people. So you can, you can be a regular person now as opposed to having to be an amp. This was actually something that a lot of people were asking for initially, but it didn't make sense in terms of storyline and whatnot to have it in the core book. Because, you know, nobody knew about amps. There wasn't a reason for people to then start picking up weapons and fighting against amps. And that's kind of what happens in year 2. So that's kind of the biggest thing. We introduced 9 new powers, 1 for each strain. We introduced a bunch of new gifts and drawbacks and whatnot, and then people can now play as saps. And then we introduced a 10th new universal power called gadgeteering, so that people could play gadgeteer users, which is fun. And then of course we made it a universal power, so even an amp could start developing gadgets if they wanted to. But it is more designed for those sap characters to kind of take advantage of, and it kind of levels the playing field. During the playtest, it was kind of crazy because the gadgeteer was taking out more bad guys than, you know, the amps were, because the amps powers are very thematically precise. Like, you can do this thing really well, or you can do this thing really well, but otherwise you're a regular person. Whereas gadgeteering gives their characters a little bit more, a wide array of different things that you can do, which made them slightly more useful in some situations than an amp would be, which was actually a really fun kind of addition to the game.
Okay. Now, Ampere 1, Ampere 2, we've mentioned before the timeline. The first Ampere 1 establishes that first year. And I want to say something about your presentation in that one of the things you do in Ampere 1 is we open up and we get, this is what the game is generally about. This is how it functions. This is what you do. A good substantive discussion of that. And then you give us the thick chapter of history, which I can't tell you how many games I have read that flip that, and I end up having to slog through all of this history before I'm like, okay, well, what are we doing? What are we actually playing at the table? And it's really well set up. It looks good. It's presented really smartly. That organization is dynamite. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
When you came in to do AMP, was your first conception that you wanted to do a meta plot, a big, long-ranging story like that?
It actually was. I had never done a meta plot before. All of my games before Ampere 1 was very much, you know, here's the setting, and then you take it and do something with it. You know, but I really kind of wanted this. If I was going to do that whole dissecting the first year, it made sense for me to dissect the entire journey that these characters would go on. And, you know, what I'm trying to do is tell you, to tell a story of this is what's going on in the world, so that you can kind of, you know, you can kind of insert your characters into it and kind of experience those things alongside, you know, kind of some of the stars of the you know, of the setting, as well as creating your own that would rival the things that they're doing. And that was always kind of the idea there. I've always been a big fan of White Wolf, and I know that that was actually one of the only other games that I know of. I know other ones have, but that I've read that had just such a deep and just engaging meta plot that people really loved. And for AMP, it just seemed so fitting to kind of create these characters. I mean, like I remember that I had people come up to me at the booth at Gen Con, and they asked, and they would come up and they would go, "What happened to Critter?" You know, like I've written, and I was just like, you know, I can't really tell you because then you're gonna have to get the next book to find out. And they're just like, "Oh, I hope she's okay." And you know, it's just like, it's so interesting to have that sort of reaction, because I'm so used to, hey, on this rule, on this page, you know, blah, 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 you know, so it was really cool to have somebody come up so engaged with the story of the world and with the characters. So I don't know. So yes, I ramble. I don't know if you know this.
No. That's I'm glad to hear this.
But no, so it is actually really cool to know that my plan to do a meta plot, and a lot of people think that meta plots have kind of gone, you know, the way of the dinosaur. You know, White Wolf, you know, kind of went away for a while, and people were like, "Whew, no more meta plot." So, but I think also my game is, I'm trying to make it more contained. Like it has a meta plot, but I have a 5-year plan. There's going to be 5-year books as well as other books kind of around it. But there's going to be 5 years of story, and then like I'm going to end it there. So it's not going to be this long thing that you'll be buying for decades to come, and stuff like that. It's too much to do. So, but yeah, I'm very happy with the meta plot as it stands, and I'm very happy with the reception that it's received. A lot of people, fans of the game, have really kind of latched onto it, and I like that.
Well, and you put the meta plot really up front. There are only a couple of other Supers games that have, I would say, a story meta plot. You mentioned Brave New World. There's certainly secrets and things that going on in there, and then Aberrant or Aberrant, however you say that, has that. But even that's kind of dialed back. Even though they do yearbooks, it's still really at the background. You put that up front. That must present some interesting challenges for you as a designer.
It really does. It really makes it so that I have to figure out what's going to happen, and then I base the rest of the book off of that. So with Ampere 1, it was slightly different because I had the mechanics down. I had a list of different powers that I wanted to have happen, and then I wanted to then have a world that reflected the systems and whatnot that I put in place. So that was a big deal for Ampere 1. For Ampere 2, it was very much the opposite. I kind of had to look at everything I had happen in Ampere 2 and Ampere 1, and make sure that those storylines and those seeds that I planted in year 1 continued on in year 2, at the same time creating new things and introducing new ideas and concepts into the world. And along with that, new powers and new abilities. So for instance, like I mentioned earlier, like it didn't make any sense to have saps as playable characters. Gadgeteering didn't make any sense to have in Ampere 1. Because in Ampere 1, it's all about the amps discovering their abilities. That's what the whole book is about. It's about them discovering their abilities and the eventual, the world figuring out that they exist. And I'm skirting around how that happens because it's actually it's a big deal in the storyline of how they are discovered and how people find out about them. But in year 2, because of how they were discovered, there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of people reacting to that, which that's where, well, if you're a regular person and you have some engineering know-how, then you can become a gadgeteer and you can kind of fight back against the amps, which that's why it made sense for that book to have those rules in it, as well as, new powers for amps, which were just powers that I had ideas for, but just the first book was so glutted already that I wanted to put some in future books. So yeah, it's and like I said, the idea here is to figure out what's going to happen and then you base mechanics and stuff off of that, which is what we did with year 2, and it's what we're doing currently with year 3. Me and my design team that I have going right now on it. So we're working right now on Ampere 3, and we're really trying to fine-tune exactly what we want to have happen in the setting, and then we'll reflect powers off of that. So it is an interesting way to do it, and some people are very impatient. I've had a lot of people who say, but I want this kind of power, and I'm like, well, technically that one shouldn't really exist yet because it doesn't make sense for the setting. And people are like, well, I don't care, just give me the power. But what we're also doing right now is we've been releasing, we released a book of adventures, and those are Ampere 1 adventures. Those adventures take place during year 1. That was an important distinction. And it was kind of a way that you could get the Ampere 1 and you could get the adventure book and you could play through. A couple of them are direct events from the timeline, whereas other ones are adventures that kind of take place during the timeline. Or like, at the same time, parallel, but not part of it. But what we're doing now is we're releasing right now, which are called AMP affiliation guides, which kind of go in depth into each of the different AMP groups, and kind of giving you more in-depth explanation of those groups, as well as new powers associated with those groups, as well as an adventure to go along with that. So we're really trying to expand on a lot of the material without it having, again, to glut the main books. But there are other books that you are able to get in other PDFs. Like, for instance, we have the Seekers of Enlightenment, which is kind of one of the main groups of the setting. And we're going to be releasing their affiliation guide pretty soon here. I'm really hoping. I'm waiting for art right now. But their book, actually, their affiliation guide has 2 new powers. One is martial arts, which is a big one that I've been asked for a lot. And then the other one is a power called kinship, which is actually a power where the amp becomes more powerful based on the number of amps that they are surrounded by. So it makes sense, again, those things make sense for the Seekers to know and for it to be represented with their group, because the Seekers are very much about amps and humans combining forces to do good for the world. That's kind of their big thing. So that's why there's a power for the amps and there's a power for regular people. You know, whereas the UHF, the United Human Front, their affiliation guide, which actually, again, those two are almost done. Theirs is they have a new power which is only for regular people, because that's what they do. Like, that's who they are. So there's not a new amp power in their book. So
now you're finding that with those things you're having to go, okay, and here's the elements that fit with year 1, and then these are the elements that fit with year 2 in those or are you trying to make it more general?
In the guides, you mean?
Yeah, in those secondary guides.
Well, what we're doing in the guides is these guides are they are amp year 2 guides.
Okay.
Is the way that we are approaching it. We hope to get all of the rest of the guides out before Amp Year 3 comes out. But the idea here is that, we're kind of taking a snapshot of the group and we're saying, this is what happened in year 1. Like, we do give a little summary of like how they came to be. But even in year 1, like, a lot of the groups were very fledgling at like the tail end of the year. Like, the changelings didn't actually come out until they weren't official or until like October. And, the UHF weren't even official until like November. So it took time for some of the groups to actually even become a thing officially. And they actually don't take, real charge of their position and their status until year 2. So it kind of makes sense that way. Yeah. That's a good answer.
Let me ask one last question about Metaplot,
Sure.
because one of the challenges that I've heard people talk about is that transition from a year 1 book to a year 2 book. For example, White Wolf did Orpheus, which is a great, amazing, contained thing. But the problem with Orpheus is that you might tool a campaign and build a campaign and have players build in that first book, and then you get to the second book and everything changes. And as a GM, you might not know that's coming, or the players might find the tone shifting. What do you do to kind of overcome that problem?
Well, I would say that I think that even though like there's a lot of mystery and there's a lot of unknowns out there, that obviously we're only released out to year 2 right now, so nobody knows for real what's going to happen in year 3. But what I do is I really try and be as transparent as possible with giving lots and lots of hints as to things that will happen. A lot of the events that are actually listed in Amp Year 1 and Amp Year 2 are to give you kind of an idea of what to expect. For instance, in Amp Year 1, there's a lot of stuff with, like, say, the Brick Bandit. And the Brick Bandit's, going around. He lives in Detroit, and he's doing a bunch of stuff. And then, in Amp Year 2, that same character, decides he doesn't want to really be a menace anymore. He kind of wants to start really trying to help his community. So it's one of those things. We really try and give a little bit more information, not too much, but just a little bit more, so that people can kind of pick up on where we're going with the story, so that it's not too big of a surprise. everything that we're doing, it makes, perfect logical sense. We're not doing the thing where White Wolf has done in the past, where like, well, we released this book and that clan that you loved, it's just gone. We decided we didn't like it and it's just dead. So we're not doing anything like that. Like we are definitely, if an affiliation gets introduced, it's because they're important to the story. And we don't plan on getting rid of that affiliation at any given time. We want all of them to be kind of, playable at any given moment. But, we introduce characters in year 1 that are going to be, that come back in year 2. We introduce characters in year 2 that are going to come back in year 3. We have a lot of really fun stuff actually going on. And obviously with the, so we also have kind of a theme going. All right. So the way that, because I've actually had this question, because somebody actually told me the other day that year 2 got really, really dark, like almost so dark that they didn't even want to read it anymore because it was starting to depress them.
Okay.
So, and I was like, I get that, but it's a pendulum, right? So it's good, and then it's going to swing down, and it's going to get really bad down here, and then it's going to swing back up to good. Like that's the plan. So no matter where it is, like, where it is. So year 3 is going to, like, lots of terrible things are going to happen in year 3, but at the tail end, it's going to be at the upswing. So year 2, actually, there were a lot of bad things in year 2.
Yes. So it's the middle film of the trilogy
exactly.
thing that, so.
Exactly. Well, I mean, and basically, and just like with the trilogy, it's like those bad things have to happen in order for the fight. You have to give them something to fight against, and then they will overcome it, and then things will be better. So Ampere 2 did get pretty dark, though. I mean, I will admit, but that's just how that works. It's storytelling. It's like there was basically, as soon as when you have a novel, you write a novel by making up interesting characters and then ruining their lives. That's actually how you write a novel. So it's fun, though. It's fun.
Well, we are close to the end of time. I wanted to keep this a tight hour, even though I have a bunch of other questions. But this has been great. Do you have anything else that you would like to pitch, to mention, that people should keep an eye out for from Third Eye, from you, that they should look out for?
Well, like I said, I mean, we're definitely. I would say everybody should go out and check out Ampere 1 because it's an awesome game. We also have Ampere 2 and Amp Adventures out. We've released a couple of the AMP affiliation guides so far, and we have more on the way. And the goal is to get all 8 of the affiliation guides out by February, when the Ampere 3 Kickstarter will be running.
Okay.
So that's the goal. We'll see if that happens. But that's the goal, is to get them all out before Ampere 3 launches, so that we can kind of hit Ampere 3 fresh. We have all the material out that we want to get out. And it's more than enough material to really kind of grab onto more of the game. We really try and give it to you in as good a bites as we can give it to you. So it's really, really good. Other than AMP, we do have, like I said, Ninja Crusade is working. That should actually be out in probably February as well, the PDF for it at least. Which, because we're looking at PDF in February and then print in April is what we're hoping for. So that's going to be really, really awesome. And Part-Time Gods, we have new Part-Time Gods of Fate stuff coming out soon. Again, we have a lot of different storylines going on. I have like a bunch of different other secret projects that I'm working on.
Okay.
So there's always stuff. There's always stuff from Third Eye Games. So you can go to thirdeyegames.net and check that out. You can also hit us up on Facebook. It's facebook.com/Third Eye Games. You can hit us on Twitter at Third Eye Games. You get the picture.
All right.
So just look up Third Eye Games. We have most of the SEO, so we should be okay.
Awesome. Eloy, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It was great to talk with you about this. So many interesting things you've said about the process. I really appreciate this very much.
No, thank you, Lowell. It was awesome to be on here.
All right.